researching at the moment into a program called Learning Together, which is a program of working with families in disadvantaged areas with children aged under 4. So that's my focus, that's my area, that's what I'm interested in, is exploring different ways of working with families. So the part of the belonging, being and becoming that I find really interesting is the notion of inspiring conversations with families about children's learning and their involvement in children's learning. And that's what I've been thinking about for the last year or so. So from that, some of the things that I'm really interested in thinking about are focusing on families as a context for children, as a part of early childhood. Having spent 35 years working with preschool children, I'm now really interested in working with the families of the children, but about their children's learning, about their being with the child, about the way that they are as a family, their belongingness, if you like, that sort of thing. So from that comes a notion of understanding that myself as an educator, I'm not an expert. I might be an expert in some areas. I'm pretty much an expert in my experience, which is around working with children and latterly working with families. But the families also bring enormous expertise about their own self and their own history and their own hopes and dreams and aspirations and thoughts and joys for their children. One of the things that I'm really interested in, and I hope to continue exploring, I guess, is the view of moving the centricity of early childhood away from, and I see it happening all the time now, away from the educator and towards the understanding that we are a part of a child's life and a part of a family's life. So the point of view completely changes when you start to think of that, when I start to think of that.
If we're working from a sociocultural approach and looking at funds of knowledge, then our understandings of curriculum are that curriculum's something that is co-constructed, that's negotiated with educators, children and families. It's not something that sprouts from the educator's head or comes out of a book or that is predetermined and fixed. It's something that's very flexible because we need to be very responsive to children's interests and ideas and their experiences that they might have at home, and we need to look at ways that we can include families in the creation and evaluation of curriculum as well.
So the way I like to come into that at the moment is drawing on Lyotard, the French philosopher, who has the understanding about little narratives and grand narratives, and I'm really interested in the little narratives, which is not around certainty, it's around how it is at this moment, with this group of people, and what are the influences and the understandings and the passions and the questions and the curiosities that are happening for this group of people at this time. By little narratives, as opposed to grand narratives, my understanding of grand narratives in Lyotard's terms is around a certainty, a one-size-fits-all, there is a way to do things and this is what we want to do. By little narratives, I take that to mean, drawing on his work, that this is what this group of people means, this is what is evolving now, these are the things that matter here, and this is the take on it. So that's an incredibly exciting place for an educator to stand, to be with other people and to have to give over to other ideas, to give over to ideas that possibly may not fit with what we understand as good parenting or good early childhood practice or good learning for children, but to work that through, to bring what I understand, to bring what they understand, and together we develop an understanding. So I've learnt more in the last 8 years working with parents about all those aspects, about early childhood, about learning that I had learnt in 30 years of working in a preschool. And I know that in the next 10 years I'll learn even more. So I really want to acknowledge all those teachers who are the families that I work with. That's really important to me.
In terms of the EYLF and Bronfenbrenner's theory, I think much more could be made of, and I think it should be important for teachers to consider the connections and the sort of connections they have with families. I think there's an awful lot of rhetoric about early childhood educators and how they work with families that really is not translated into practice. So in my research work, either in growing up in Australia, the transition to school study that I'm currently engaged in, then families have lots of great experiences. But on the other hand, it sometimes comes through that the teachers, the early childhood educators, really don't have a sensitivity or sufficient sensitivity to the needs of the families and the concerns of the families. And I think that teachers and early childhood educators are extremely busy. We're all caught up in the routines and the organisations in which we're working, but somehow that reaching out to families to really make a difference, particularly families who need some support to understand how their child is learning, how they can be involved in that learning at home, is something that I think really would benefit the child if educators embrace that.
When I talk about families as my teachers, there's a danger of hearing that as the slogan, I guess, in a way, that so many educators work by, which is parents as children's first educators. And that's something that I've really I've begun to problematise as I've developed closer relationships with a range of families, because I think whilst children are learning all the time from their context, which their closest context is their family, there are so many values that we put around the notion of parents as first educators. One is that we only think in terms of the positive, and so we're trying to form parents as people, families, as people who develop all the good learnings for children. And children learn as much from the negative and the hurtful and the painful and the toxic experiences that can happen around them as they do from the positive things. I think the use of parents as children's first teachers is currently forcing a whole range of families into the notion that there is educational things that they're supposed to be doing and there's the rest of their life. And so invariably I hear families begin a conversation with me as an educator by talking about, we do such and such because it's educational, and forgetting about all the other really rich and vibrant and important things that they are doing.
Bronfenbrenner reiterated again and again that it is the main settings in which children spend their time, particularly the family as most important, but then maybe it's the childcare setting, the preschool program, the early years at school, that educators need to make the connections across settings. And this is why I'm pretty passionate and have published about parent involvement with schooling and their children's education, because I think sometimes that sensitivity and awareness just gets a little bit lost in the heat of the day and the busyness of the day.
The second strand of my work, and this really gets to Indigenous education and multicultural education in particular, is the issue of linking children with their ancestry. The book that I mentioned earlier by Devon and Goodyear, its most important contribution is a recognition that if we sever social linkages between people and their origins, it produces extremely traumatic experiences. And there's a vast literature in psychoanalysis on the consequences of severing social linkages. The only way to heal such linkages, I believe, is through narrative. through engaging children and engaging communities in reconstructing the narratives of their history, their spirits, their ancestry, their origins, their music, their art, and so on. And a school curriculum that's prepackaged and that strives to deliver to children what we think is good for them is, I believe, catastrophic, particularly for children from cultures other than white mainstream. And that particularly is most true of Indigenous cultures, where we could, if we allowed Indigenous peoples to take some charge of their culture, we could allow them to build curriculum that was indeed located in their communities and would allow children to locate their subjectivities in historical context. When I was young, my mother used to fix my holes in my elbows and in my socks by darning. And I think darning is a powerful metaphor for what's required here. The idea of stitching the new with the old so that people begin to reconnect. And I think the lack of that darning is a major problem with, for instance, national curriculum that tries to give the same thing to everybody.
I've had the privilege of working with families in settings that are not ordinary early childhood settings where our focus is on the family as a way of working with the child. In childcare settings, in preschool settings, in school settings, for so long we've paid lip service to the notion of partnerships, we've paid lip service to the notion of parent or family involvement. We have to really consider how we have cast that, how we have really structured that. So if we consider parent involvement to be making sure they're coming in and cutting the fruit and wiping the tables and doing the washing at the end of the week, what is the role we're casting them into, particularly if we're talking about the mothers, the women? Are we saying to them and ourselves, your role in this place, in this community, in this forum, drawing on Dalberg and Moss, are we saying your role is kind of slave, that you actually bring nothing else to this place? Even when we do involve parents in a governance structure, how often is that simply rubber stamping what you as the educator, the person with all the knowledge, knows to be true? Yes, we'll do this fundraising. Yes, we'll focus on this piece of work. How often do we really listen? How often do we really move that involvement into family-centred approaches? And how do we even do that? And it is a huge question. It's a huge, I believe it's a really huge issue that we've swept away, that we've paid lip service to. And I don't know the answers. I don't begin to know the answers, but I think it's something that we need to consider, we need to explore with families. Which isn't to say we need to force them into being active partners. For many people, sorry, that's actually a side issue. My child is with you. That's what matters at the moment. I'm quite happy with that. And we need to respect that, but we need to make sure that we're not pushing people into marginalised roles, if you like, within our settings against their will, in a way, or not enabling them to engage in the way that they would like to engage far more. So it's so important to consider the role we cast them in.